Hello everybody, I'm Mark. You can find me on the internet at Marks Johnson. So in my day job, I'm a Moodle developer at the Open University. Although I'm not here on behalf of the Open University, I'm here on behalf of myself. Although that said, we are currently hiring, so if you want to be a Moodle developer, talk to me later. I used to work at the University of Oxford for a group called OSWatch, where I was basically paid to be an open source geek for a living, which was quite fun. And that's where this talk comes from. OSWatch was basically an advisory service for the UK academic sector, so that when academics had questions about open source, they had somebody to ask who knew vaguely what they were talking about. And as has been mentioned, I'm also a podcaster. If you want to listen to me talk about open source some more, go to ubuntupodcast.org and subscribe. Anything else I want to say there? I don't think so. I seem to be missing a slide though. Okay. Right, so I'm going to ad-lib this bit. So a bit about this talk and where it came from. This talk was originally written as part of a training course for community leaders in open source. What we found was that when people had questions about community leadership, they often had problems in their communities, sometimes ones which they weren't aware of, and they weren't aware why they were having issues. So the reason that we designed this talk as part of a broader training course was that we thought that it would help if people understood the theory behind communities, why we form them in the first place, what they are, and help people look at their own communities from a theoretical perspective. It might help give them a better understanding of what's going on. I have adapted it a bit, so hopefully it's not too reliant on the other things that went with it, but if anything seems a bit out of context, then that's probably why, and we can talk more about the other aspects later if you want to. So, to start with, what's a community? What do we mean when we say community? One broad definition I found of a community is a collection of people or animals who interact in the same environment. I think that's probably about as broad as you can get. Any group of people doing something in the same sort of place, be that online, be that here, out waiting for the bus, whatever you like. These are all communities. So a community is basically defined by the people, what's motivating them to do what they're doing, and what they're doing. And that's about as good as we can get if we just start from a pure blue sky theoretical perspective. If we want to get more specific into the definition of communities, we need to look at what's motivating people to join a community in the first place. Very simply, looking at why we might form a community, why we as people might do things with other people. We want a sense of belonging. Humans are sociable animals. We like to feel like we're part of a group. We get on well with each other. We feel safe when we're together and doing things together. That's, again, a very broad definition. But when we actually look at what communities do and how they function, something more interesting starts to happen. We start to see something called social capital. Here's the definition of social capital by the guy who came up with the term. It is the goodwill, fellowship, mutual sympathy, and social intercourse among a group of individuals. So what this means is when we interact as people in a community, we sort of accrue an almost invisible currency between us. So just like a business is building value in the business, which is making money for its shareholders, as a successful community operates, it builds social capital for its members, and that enables them to do things. Social capital is basically intangible, but some communities that you might be familiar with have tried to make this a more tangible thing. So anyone here use Reddit? Yeah, so on Reddit you get, is it called karma? Yes, so karma you earn by posting interesting things which people upvote. You get it by commenting, you get it by upvoting other people's things, and this gives you a karma score, and you can actually go back and see everything that gave you that karma. Well, this is a form of social capital because other people can see the karma that you've got, and they might think, well, you know, they're participating well in this community. Or it might mean something completely different, knowing some of the Reddit communities that I've read. Stack Overflow is another interesting example. You have a reputation on Stack Overflow, and you build your reputation, again, by commenting, by voting, by answering questions. But part of the way that Stack Overflow works is really interesting, because as you build your reputation, you actually then get access to more features of the site. So at first, I'm not sure if you can even post a question when you sign up and you have 0 reputation on Stack Overflow. You first have to vote on someone else's question, and you have to comment, and you have to vote on other people's comments and respond to questions, and you gain reputation, and eventually you might be able to edit people's answers, or you might be able to mark something as a duplicate, and you become a moderator. You actually become a leader of the community. But to do that, you have to first build your social capital by showing that you're a good functioning member of the community. Has anyone read Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom by Cory Doctorow? So that's a book set in a world where essentially humankind's basic needs are all met by automation. But people still work because they have this currency called Wuffy. And the way that you make Wuffy is you do something for someone else which earns their esteem. So the book itself is about people who work at Disneyland. They don't need to work at Disneyland for money, but people who work at Disneyland make a lot of joy for other people, and therefore they earn a lot of Wuffy. And the way that Wuffy is spent is that if there's something that requires some scarcity, like a seat in a nice restaurant, the people who have the most Wuffy, which is the most social capital, they get it first. So if you want to look into more get a more concrete picture of what social capital is, that's a good book to read. So once we get social capital in our community, we don't have to spend it on seats in restaurants. We have money for that. So what can we do in our communities once we've accrued some social capital? We get to share our ideas and experience. So, I'm a member of the open source community. I did a podcast, someone listened to my podcast, they invited me to come along here, and now I'm talking to you. That's a benefit of the social capital that I accrued. Self-improvement. You get to use your activities in the community to improve upon your own skills. And the reason that people will do that is because you've interacted with them in the first place, and they get value out of their interactions with you. So you've built social capital. You can complement your own skills with the skills of others. This is something I'm going to come on to in a minute when I talk about diversity. But within a community, you don't want to have people who only have one set of skills. You want people whose skills complement each other. And then when they work together as a community, they can feed off each other's skills. But you have to build the relationships with people first before you can do that. You can't just walk into a room and say, who wants to help me do this? Because it's harder to work together before you've got to know someone, you've got to know what they're into. And collaborating on shared goals. The best communities aren't just communities of people who all want to do something themselves. They're communities who want to produce something or gather a knowledge base as a shared artifact of their community's activities. And these are all things which require social capital to make them possible. So that's a bit about what motivates communities. Another really useful thing to know about is the varieties of community and how to identify what kind of community you're part of. I'm going to talk about 3 varieties of community, which might come up when I press this. Yes. Communities of interest, communities of practice, and communities of circumstance. You might have heard some of these terms before, you might not. There are other things, you might have heard community of something else. Most of those, I'm going to mention a few of them, most of those are special cases of these 3, as we'll see. So a community of interest, a gathering of people assembled around a topic of common interest. So a community of interest exists for these reasons: to exchange information, to obtain answers to personal questions, improve their understanding, and share common passions. Now, these aren't necessarily people who are all have the same skills or all doing the same thing. They're just people who want to share their experience of their interests, their hobbies, things like that. So this could be things like a discussion group, a fan club, a community of interest, where the interest is, a band or an artist or something like that. Book clubs, people in book clubs, they're all sitting there reading the same book. They're not working on, they're not working on another book as a result of this. They just want to read the book and share their experience of the book and their interest in the book and perhaps the author or perhaps the genre. But they're just taking away their experience of having read the book and discussed it with that group. They're not trying to produce something out of it. Another more, this is one which I've heard a lot more. You hear it a lot in businesses or between businesses, communities of practice. So a community of practice, a group of people who share a concern or passion for something that they do, and they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. That's the key thing, is that they're not just sharing their interests and experiences, they're actually trying to improve their practice at their skill or their interest. So just having the practice in common doesn't mean that you're a community of practice. You actually have to work together as a community to build the social capital and learn from one another. So the three things that define a community of practice: you've got the domain, so that's the thing that you're all doing in common. You've got the community, which is who's doing it, and the practice. The practice is the things that you do to make them to enhance your knowledge of the domain. So it might be giving a talk, it might be running a workshop. So some examples of community of practice: professional bodies, user groups. I was talking to someone earlier about Linux user groups. That was a community of practice because we were all trying to get better at using Linux. Online gamers. Online gamers aren't always necessarily working together, but they have to play together to get better at playing the game themselves. So that makes it a community of practice. Sports teams is a bit more of a collaborative one where the whole team is trying to get better as a team. So that might be a more sociable example, but they're both the same thing. They're both communities of practice. A community of circumstance. A lot of the time when we hear the word community just used by itself, we're talking about a community of circumstance. A community of circumstance is defined by the shared experience or situation of its members. It's not something necessarily that people did on purpose. It's something they just ended up in. So some of the other types of community you might have heard about are really special cases of community of circumstance. So a community of place is a community of circumstance. The circumstance in that case is you're all in the same place. So your local neighbourhood, if you have a street party with the people in your street, all you've really got in common as a whole group is that you're in the same place. So you're a community of circumstance. Community of position is another one. You might, for example, a group of IT managers. They might have a group for meeting up and discussing being an IT manager. What they have in common is that they're in the same position. Now, the next bit is a bit of an example of how old this slide is, but when I was trying to think of a graphic to illustrate what a community of circumstance is, this is what I came up with. Does anyone remember Lost?
Yeah.
Right, so Lost was a community of circumstance. A group of people who have nothing in common, well, it turns out they had all sorts of things in common. How crazy. But yeah, people who have nothing in common crash on an island and they have to live together. And, they're all from different backgrounds, but they are a community. They're a community of circumstance. The circumstance being we're on an island. So, ask the audience, what kind of community are we? I heard place. I like to think we're more than just a community of place. I don't think we met up here just because we're all in Oxford.
Interest.
We could be a community of interest. I'd like to think we're more than a community of interest. I'd like to think we're a community of practice.
Is there a hierarchy in that then? Because a lot of people, they seem to sort of lost, they're maybe getting better at surviving on their own.
Well, some of them are.
Well, yeah.
There might be sub-communities within the community of practice. I thought I had a slide about that. Maybe that's on in a minute. Oh, it will be, yes. Yes, so a community can form sub-communities within it. So some of the people in Lost were getting better at surviving on an island. Some of them were trying to get off the island. Some of them were just trying to explore the island and find out its secrets. Yeah, so I would say DevOps Oxford is a community of practice because the domain is DevOps. That's the thing which we all have in common. The community is us in this room, and the practice is what we're doing tonight. We are having, we're listening to talks, we're having discussions after the talks, we're going to the pub later, and hopefully what we're trying to get out of that is improving our practice of DevOps and then probably taking it back to our day jobs and saying, hey, look what I learned last night or last week or whatever. I think that's what we are. But some of you might be taking something different from this. Here's some other examples that you might have heard of. Does anyone care to guess? No, I don't think I actually said what I thought any of these were earlier. Okay, so I mentioned Reddit. What would you say Reddit is? What kind of community? Yeah, okay, I'd agree with that. What about Stack Overflow? Practice, yeah, I'd say it's a community of practice around programming. Xbox Live, I kind of gave that one away. Yeah, I'd say that's a community of practice around gaming. Macmillan Cancer Support. Yeah, I'd say that's a community of circumstance. Mumsnet.
That's the same. Circumstance.
Now, I would say, yes, I would say Mumsnet is a community of circumstance, where the circumstance is you happen to be a parent. Some people might think it's a community of practice, where people are trying to be better at being parents. I haven't seen a huge amount of evidence of that. Right, so yes, here's what I was saying just now. A successful community of interest may form subgroups. So you may have a community that starts off as just people sharing a common interest, but once they get to know each other, they realise that within that, they might want to do some more things together within the domain of their interest. So within that, you might form a goal-oriented community of interest or a community of action or purpose. So this is a group within a community of interest who is actually trying to, they're not necessarily a community of practice, they're not trying to improve their knowledge of something or their way of doing something, but they want to produce an output based on their shared interest. You may also get communities of practice or communities of circumstance forming from a community of interest. So if we say DevOps, everyone interested in DevOps is a community of interest, then we are a community of circumstance within the DevOps community. Our circumstances, we happen to be able to get to Oxford on a Wednesday evening. So now I'm going to touch a bit on diversity. So when we talk about diversity in communities, there's two different kinds of diversity to be aware of, one of which tends to be the one that we think about all the time, and one of which is probably far more important if you want your community to succeed. So the first one is surface level diversity. That's the one that's really easy to spot because it tends to be about what people look like. So these are things like race, gender, age, and so on. Deep level diversity is about the skills and about the personalities and the things that aren't necessarily obvious until you start talking to someone. Have we got anything else on this slide? Yes, no, I'll come back to that. So, good surface level diversity is important because if you don't have good surface level diversity, it makes getting good deep level diversity much, much harder. Basically, you have a talent pool equal to how good your surface level diversity is, and you need a broad talent pool in order to make a sustainable community. An example of that is if everyone who organised the event tonight decided that they were no longer able to organise the event because of other commitments, we would need someone else from the community to step up and say, well, I'm the kind of person who's good at running events, I'll take over. Now, it's really easy for us to get lots of people in this room because people can just come along for free and they don't really have to put in any effort. But it takes probably a different kind of person to be the one who says, well, I'll book the speakers, I'll make sure that we can get a venue for free, I'll speak to whoever's going to give us the pizza. It's a different set of skills or a different set of personalities. So you need to have that deep level diversity in a community to make it sustainable. If you're putting off people from joining your community because of surface level diversity issues, then you're reducing the talent pool that you have access to, essentially. So that's why it's important never to exclude people based on shallow level diversity. But you also need to pay attention to who you've got in your community to make sure you also have that deep level diversity. And this is really hard. There's a reason it's hard. It's because that we join communities because of the things that we have in common. But to make the community succeed, we also need to make sure that we don't have too much in common. And you know, there's not an easy answer for it. You have to work at it. You have to get used to it, really. But at the end of the day, it's all about sustainability. And sustainability is a whole other topic, which I'm not going to cover in this, but it's a really important one for communities. Right, I'm now going to, that was all theoretical stuff. I'm now going to look at a case study with a community that I'm very familiar with, which is Moodle. Quick show of hands, who knows what Moodle is? Okay, cool. Oh, that's about half of you. That's better than I thought. So Moodle is an open source online learning platform. To put it very broadly, it's what I work on as my day job. The Open University uses Moodle to, as a base for its online learning platform, which we then build stuff on top of. We also contribute back to the community. It's used internationally by lots of people. Hold on, I might put this on the slide. Oh, here we go. So here's what I thought was a good summary of the Moodle community. It's a community of teachers, students, developers, designers, testers, businesses, all sorts of people. The goal of the Moodle community is empowering educators to improve our world. So the goal of the Moodle community isn't to produce a piece of software, it's to empower educators. So Moodle is a community of interest. One of the outputs of well, in fact, there's several pieces of software now that are made by the Moodle community, but their goal is to empower educators, not to make software. If it turned out that making software wasn't relevant to empower educators, the community would probably get a lot smaller, but what was left of it would still be interested in empowering educators. Within that community of interest, we have a lot of subgroups of communities. So we have support forums. We have a general support forum, which is a community of interest where people are interested in using Moodle. We have local support groups where people might meet up and have sessions like this about Moodle. So that's a community of interest and perhaps a community of circumstance as well, where people are in the same place. So the general support forum is in English. That's where most of the discussion happens. You also have forums in other languages. So those are communities of circumstance, where the circumstance is people talk a language other than English. You have teaching groups. You have people who are teaching with Moodle and sharing ideas about how to teach with Moodle effectively. That's a community of practice, where people are getting better at teaching. The general developer forum is another community of practice, where people are getting better at being Moodle developers. But the development teams themselves are a goal-oriented community of practice, because they're actually producing an output from, a goal-oriented community of interest, because they're actually producing an output based on the interest of empowering educators. And also Moodle Moot organisers. Moodle Moot is a series of national conferences around Moodle, and they're organised by members of the community in each country. So the organisers of each Moodle Moot are a goal-oriented community of practice. Their goal is running the conference. I keep saying goal-oriented community of practice, I mean goal-oriented community of interest. There are various ways of accruing social capital in the Moodle community. I mentioned the support forum. So if you post on the support forum, that's going to accrue social capital, because that's just the first step. You're engaging in the community, you're posting, you're asking a question. Once you've asked a question, you can then learn, and you might be able to answer someone else's question. If you post a response to someone, they can vote your response is useful. And if you get enough useful responses, you get a badge that says you're particularly useful. You can file bug reports. If you found a bug in Moodle and you can reproduce it, you can file it on their tracker. And then people will see you as someone who takes the time not to just complain about bugs, but to actually report them to the people who might fix them. And you can even contribute your own bug fix if you want. And then people will see you're the kind of person who fixes bugs, and as they review your code, they'll see, actually, you don't just fix bugs, but you know what you know how to write a decent fix. Doing a peer review is a really good sort of a really good way. If you're not yet ready to write your own fix, you can look at a fix someone else has done, and you can read it and say, yep, I think that's okay. That seems to do what you said it would do. That does a favour for the person who wrote it. It also does a favour for the person who's got to integrate it into the main Moodle codebase. So that's a good way to get your name in the community doing something useful, accruing social capital. Financial support's an interesting one in Moodle. Deep level diversity. One of the really interesting things about Moodle that I haven't seen so much in other open source projects is that you don't really have the community of developers and the community of users. Everyone is in one place. There's not a separate mailing list where people talk about development. There's one forum on the web where everyone asks all of the questions and gets involved in all of the discussions. You have developers there, you have learning technologists there, you have teachers there. Students. Now, students are the people who actually use Moodle day to day. And I think it's possible that we don't have enough of those in the community, because a lot of the decisions about how Moodle works tend to be made by the developers and by the learning technologists. I think it would be good if we had better diversity in there to ensure that Moodle was serving the people it's really meant to serve. So, in summary, the reason we form communities in the first place is we build social capital, which allows us to achieve our goals as a collective. They might be our own goals, they might be the goals of the group. Members of the community will have different motivations. That will give them different levels of commitment to the project, to the community, and to the different roles within the community. There are different types of community. An open source project, it should be a community of interest, not a community of practice. You don't just want to be a group of developers. You need other people in your community as well. So you need a community of interest who are interested in the goal that your open source project solves. And encouraging deep level diversity will provide a community with varied personalities and skills. And this is extremely important for long-term sustainability of your project. Here are some references. If you want to learn more about the theory of communities and how to put it into practice, I really recommend this book, The Art of Community by John O'Bacon. It's very good. I think the first edition is Creative Commons as well, but then you can also get it in print.